When I joined policing, there were no women as chief police officers at all. So there was no assistant chiefs, deputy chiefs or chiefs.
A structure that's built like a pyramid where you've got the different skill sets at this level and some different skill sets or roles at that level is far more solid than a single tower that one brick's removed and it all falls down.
Used to have a competition called Miss Lovely Legs. Oh. Well, you'd never have that today. And so there were, when you started looking at how women were depicted in police women, it was sort of a frippery on the side, and because initially women only used to get 90% of the pay of men.
We've got this great country, and part of that is, I was hearing just a few days ago, we still got net migration of 600,000, and without getting into all of that, what it says to me is we're still a country people want to come to.
And so when I came back, they asked if I would go to the recruit training centre, which at that time they used to do recruit on a regional level. And I went through the teaching practice, which again was very different. But I loved teaching adults who wanted to learn. So different
as opposed to students who have been told they've got to get.
Yeah, exactly. It was just a breath of fresh air. It was an amazing experience, and I loved it. And taking people from being, ordinary members of the public on the street one day to, again, 10 weeks, 12 weeks later, when they were fully fledged police officers who you'd be happy to go out with on patrol. And I would be happy to go out with when I went back to,
And obviously you've inspired and trained and developed many, many police officers, but you also specifically became president of the British Association for Women in Policing. At what point did you sort of take on that baton of whether it's gender equality or just helping them get the recognition they deserve to be equal?
It was when I became chief inspector, and you looked at some other forces. And when I joined policing, there were no women as chief police officers at all. So there was no assistant chiefs, deputy chiefs or chiefs. Wow. And the big question was, when would we have somebody in those ranks? And some were saying probably not in our lifetimes. It's that sort of view at that time.
How sad when you look
I know. And it was who was going to be the first, who was going to be the one that breaks through. And if you remember, then the first one who really broke through was Alison Holford, and it was a bit of a scandal.
Right.
It didn't go so well, I think.
Which didn't help the cause.
No. Although she did until she went swimming in a swimming pool in her underclothes, I think. And of course, you have to realise that although you all want to be treated equally, if there's a sniff of a news story, the newspapers will actually want it. And that's something, again, that you have to be really careful of. In fact, through British Association of Women in Policing, we used to do things on media. And there was a professor called Jennifer Brown who looked at the depiction of women in policing from the sort of outset. And Police Review, which was our go-to magazine, particularly for promotion exams and the like, used to have a competition called Miss Lovely Legs. Oh, well, you'd never have that today. And so there were, when you started looking at how women were depicted in police women, it was sort of a frippery on the side. And because initially women only used to get 90% of the pay of men, because they were just dealing with children and women, and that was really what they did. And they didn't ever work night shifts. So there was a whole sort of range of issues. And so when I became Chief Constable, one of the first things the photographer asked is, would I mind sitting astride a motorbike? I'd seen pictures of these before, and I decided this was not appropriate in terms of sitting astride. There's lots of different connotations that are drawn from that. So I said, absolutely not. And there are other things, how would you want to be
Because
depicted?
They wouldn't have asked a male in that position.
No, they wouldn't. And it was that sort of thing about something, no, I won't say it, as the depiction. That
I get it. It doesn't need to be said.
Yeah. There was lots of, so that you had to be really careful around how you want to be depicted. And even off duty, if you went to a fancy dress party or something, be aware, because if somebody takes a photograph and wants to put it out there, they can.
That should be true of anyone in any walk of life. But I guess when you're in a service role or a public role, you're never off duty. And as a policeman, my limited understanding is, you're always on duty, because if you see a crime or that, then you're
Yeah.
supposed to act anyway. So in effect, if you go into a role where you're told you're never really off duty, you should be conscious of that. And for me, the media have always been after certain. Certainly, once you're senior, they want to get that because it's shocking. And that was just newspapers and TV before, but now with social media, literally every second of your life, potentially someone's gonna try and catch you out.
And that's why I just think that, it's so important that people don't realise when they're young and going up through, they don't know where they're going to end their career. And because it's so searchable, social media, if you've done something as a youngster, it can be brought back to haunt you when you are about to become a CEO of a big company or a chief constable or whatever. You just have to be really alert to the things that you do and the impact it can have.
But it is a reality that, when people apply for jobs, we get this CV which has been manufactured on some CV template or told what you need to do and how you need to premise it. The moment you have that person's name, you're going to Google them. You're going to look at their digital footprint. And, if the first thing you see is them, male or female, half naked or being sick beside a pub, that is unquestionably going to tarnish somewhat the perspective that you see from a CV. Now, doesn't mean they're not human, doesn't mean that they might not let their hair down occasionally, but why would you set yourself up sometimes to be in a position where that will come out if you're after a successful career?
Yeah. So you just have to be careful. So I think I was very careful from the outset as to how I depicted myself, which is why I don't really drink. I would always leave at an appropriate time. It was a bit like parents leaving, whatever. But you have to be really strong with yourself. And although your inner self might say it would be quite nice to stay and have a party with these guys, your actual professional self says no, it wouldn't be.
Well, and one of the things I often say in business mentoring is the key. If someone says to me, "What's the key to success?" I will often say focus and discipline. One of the reasons people fail: lack of focus, lack of discipline. It's where am I going? What do I want to do? And what disciplines must I follow to help me hit that future target or goal? I want to get into some of the things that you've done, which are really interesting as well. So,
just to say though that my although it might have looked like a meteoric rise, there was a definite lull in the middle. I went to London to be an acting chief inspector, and quite a few people when they were acting chief inspectors.
Was that the Heathrow?
No, that wasn't that. Yeah. No, it was in the ACPO Secretariat, which is the Association of Chief Police Officers, which is the best thing I ever did to become a chief officer, actually, because the immersion that you got in some of the national policing was, second to none. But it did come with a cost. So when I came back into force, I have to say there was a smack of discrimination and antiness from one of the senior officers, and I ended up taking the force to tribunal. And I had a big decision to make because so I went back to being an inspector. So this is my although it might look like a smooth passage, it's been a snakes and ladders passage.
Right.
So I went down to being an inspector. And then I had to realise that this was actually causing me more damage. I knew from talking to the force solicitor afterwards that there had been conversations around, gosh, what are we going to do about it? Because they realised that on many of the things that I was saying, I was right. And I sort of thought, well, I wanted my day in court, but I knew that it would actually probably ruin my career and probably ruin me. And I do think some people will persist with a cause to their ultimate own detriment. But by drawing stumps and saying to the organisation, because they had made some concessions, they decided that it was wrong the way they had managed the promotion process. It was wrong in terms of what they needed to do, but they were never going to then give me back the promotion that they'd taken away. I had to work my way through that.
Again.
Yeah. But that's why it then looked quite fast, because I was then chief inspector, superintendent, and then I got, and of course, the blockage that you can have is the strategic command course. That's on your own ability. And I always said I wanted to do that test because I never wanted to leave the organisation saying, could I have?
And it was that test that would it be fair to say, led to you getting your OBE? Because that was for management of complex and contentious issues, and that. So, and I guess that was following some of the work you did on protection of royalty and VIP, and so on.
So when I became an assistant chief, I suppose part of it was luck, but not luck. Is that I happened to be assistant chief at the time the Queen Mother died, so I was in charge of her funeral. Probably prepared me for my current role. And so that was part of it, but also it was recognition of the work that I'd done in terms of women's development and women's progression, which at the time was really tough because there was a lot of, we were facing a lot of negative, well, it wasn't actually from inside the organisation, negative sort of connotations around why women want to be equal, because how can you be? Because this is where it's about brains, not brawn came in.
Yeah.
And it was now I look back, it was a real uphill struggle, although now I look around and I just see women who are achieving thanks to what but actually many other women did at the time in terms of trying to make sure that the playing field was even. And I have to say, it wasn't just women, it was men. So if you look at the gender agenda, the first 2 pages, when we wrote that took us months to actually say, because what I was absolutely clear on from the outside, this is about being pro-women, not anti-men. Yeah. Absolutely, it had to be, because
they are mutually exclusive, aren't
they,
in that sense? So they don't. There's not a connection.
No,
it doesn't have
because
to be.
We were working in an organisation at the time that was 83% men. When we started, it was 17%. Many of them were our advocates. They really wanted, and particularly the dads, those that actually wanted to see their daughters, some of them in policing and some of them not in policing, wanted them to achieve. They could see the hurdles in place. So they were working with us. There were a few, and they were probably just the 2% who were really anti. I got poked once in the chest saying, you only got that job because you're a woman. So I had to then poke him back and say, no, I didn't, because there were 2 jobs and the other one was a man got. I didn't actually then go on to say the only reason you didn't to get it was because you haven't invested in your career in terms of academic. So I
evolved.
No, I mean I did. Yeah, it doesn't involve. I did have done in total 4 degrees, but it was never ever about getting academic prowess and be able to hold my head up high in Cambridge, because they'll say, gosh, Julie, you don't often see chief constables, but that wasn't the reason. It was to make sure all my building blocks were in place.
Yeah.
So, having done education, which was great for the training side of it, but it really was about doing law or police studies, and law first at Bristol, police studies, and then I did management. Somebody wanted me to do a PhD. I said, no, I need to do an MBA because I need to be better leader. I need to understand the things I need to understand.
And then you got your Anglo-Ruskin honorary doctorate for law. And we were talking before about education. And we started off talking about in school, but actually about the importance of education being a lifelong thing, every day being a school day, and about what's the next goal. And if I want to go from where I am to anywhere or any achievement, what have I got to learn? What do I need to do differently to get from where I am to where I want to be? Yeah. And often there is an education in there, maybe not academic, but there's something we need to learn because we are today where we are based on the knowledge and behaviours that we have today. And I think you agree about lifelong learning.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was one of my mantras at Cambridgeshire Constabulary, was about lifelong learning. We are continually learning. If we think we've got it all, then we're deluding ourselves. And the reason I did degrees, it wasn't to just get the letters behind my name. It gave me a discipline. But it also meant I was able to meet other police officers, actually not just from this country, but from other countries. I was able to meet people outside policing. So the MBA was a public sector MBA done at Henley Management College. I met a whole range of different people, different ideas, different industries, different leadership programs I went on. Interestingly, I went on a Windsor leadership program, and one of the people there who we never knew we'd meet again, was Bishop Stephen at Ely.
Okay.
So we were on the same program. So it shows that the church do, lifelong leadership as well as policing and a lot of other industries. So yeah. So
the church has taken on all sorts of, people think of religion, but I remember I was a trustee at Peterborough Cathedral when Charles was the dean, and they didn't realise that they're dealing with mental health. It's often multi-faith, even though a church might come from a particular religious leaning. They're often multi-faith. They are about being the sort of spiritual centre of the city, or just somewhere to go and be quiet. Yeah. I mean, Peterborough's cathedral is in the heart of the city, but I often think it's the heart in a broader sense, and that's where religion should be. And for that to be the case as we change as people and our behaviours change, I think they have a very varied role and need to change and learn to be different within that. In fact, where religions had problems, I think it's because they've not evolved.
Yeah, and I think that they've done a sterling job in Peterborough because they were one of the leaders for the Interfaith Council. I was talking to members of that yesterday, and that it really has been part of why Peterborough has got a really good cohesive community, and they nip things in the bud pretty quickly if there's some sentiments that seem to be appearing that are anti another faith or anti another particular group. They're very proactive, and it's because they work and talk together, which is really important.
And I have to. I in my 20s was always passionately interested in religion, and I will often say I'm not a religious person. I think the better definition is I'm a very religious person, but I can't find a single faith that I will commit to, if you like. But what you find is the guiding beliefs have far more in common than difference.
Yeah.
We should help our neighbours. We shouldn't hurt people. We should be honest. And all of those kind of whether it's the 10 Commandments or the guiding principles, they're more common than they are not. And therefore, I don't quite understand why more churches aren't doing multi-faith.
It's interesting because when we had our carol service, which we did this year, it was to replicate what the Princess of Wales was doing in Westminster Abbey. So we did one in Peterborough, and we had a young girl, aged 8, who did a reading from the Quran, and then she translated it into English.
Oh, right.
It was so powerful. And then people were able to see that actually could have been used anywhere. And so some of this is about, unpicking the myths that actually exist. And, if more people were able to read the translations, they'd realise that there was, as you were saying, far more similarities than differences.
Well, and often, whether it's politics, I'm left, I'm right, I'm this, I'm that, or I'm Catholic, I'm Protestant, I'm Muslim. It's too many of the teachings almost suggest, maybe sometimes do directly suggest, you shouldn't do anything. They don't allow you to open your mind to the commonalities or the crossover. Any degree of trying to gain further understanding is somehow disloyal. As a Labour person, you can't think anything right-wing is good. As a Tory, you can't think anything socialist or left-wing is good. And I think with life, media, education, religion often maybe not deliberately, but do directly influence a closed-mindedness to other opinions.
I hope you're enjoying Success is a System. Every Tuesday we launch it on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Drop us a note and tell us who you would like to see or hear on Success is a System, or what subjects you'd like us to cover to help you and your business. Success is a System. Like, subscribe, and make sure you get it every Tuesday for great lessons and systems that have made people wealthy, healthy and successful.
I think what I found was with the police authority, which is interesting because we had a mix of magistrates, independents, and then councillors of all different, they were in proportion, so Labour, Conservative, Lib Dems, was actually, except when it came to budgetary times, where they would probably vote on political lines, in terms of everything else, it was around what's best for the community. And I think local politics is something very different. It's about what's best for the community. And whatever hat they hang themselves on in terms of the ticket to get elected is not what actually happens in reality, because they actually unshackle themselves of that colour.
Well, and I had a slight foray into politics a few years ago, and I lost, which is probably a blessing in disguise. But one of the things that made me particularly my primary drive was Peterborough first. 5 generations of my family have lived here, and I just wanted Peterborough to be put first by a politician. And what I looked at as a behavioural profiler and trying to understand what's gone wrong in politics, it was essentially that it seemed to me that if you go back 30, 35 years when I was doing geography in school and we were looking at the EEC and so on, I was looking at the time, politicians, if you looked at the job description, it would be constituency first, country second, party third, personal last, in effect. You should be constituency driven because they're the ones who lend you their vote.
Yeah.
But it seemed to me that now in all parties, it's not one or worse or better than the other. It's flipped and it's almost self-driven, then party, then country, and somehow the constituency or the community, which is where you get really in touch with people and what's important in the community that lent you their vote, seems to be last on their list of priorities. And that's a frustration to me. But I could talk forever on so many of these things. And I've just realised you need to be leaving in half an hour at the very latest.
Okay.
So I'm going to make it so it's 10 minutes so you're not rushing.
Okay.
But I want to get into... So if I've tried to put together a lot of your things, you've been recognised and you've worked really hard to get that recognition and taken on levels of responsibility and roles that must have given you at least another job in terms of hours outside of your job, if you like. But a lot of it, people may think, you said about the 4 degrees, was kind of academic or process. But I often think at the bottom of that, so when you're looking at armed protection or as Chief of Police for Cambridgeshire, it's you that has to make that decision to pull a trigger or not pull a trigger. And that isn't something we can mull over at that moment in time. How do you prepare or get to a comfort level where, because at the time it seems best, but you don't know it's the right thing, but you've got to make a decision of that kind of importance?
I never personally have to, but it's about having the confidence in the officers who are skilled to do that. And we only have a very small number of those. And it's about working with them, training them and knowing, and frequently I would say to them that they actually have, and there was a scale of force that you could actually use, right from talking about something to then up sort of lifting that level of force. And then the ultimate clearly is shooting. And they have to be your best officers because they have to make a judgment on that scale. So they really have to look.
But they're not the Rambos. They're far more measured, calm.
Much measured. They have to look at all the options. And if talking somebody down, because nobody actually wants to shoot, because I can tell you, once you have shot and you may have either killed or wounded somebody, the impact on the officer, him or herself, is extraordinary and can ruin the rest of their lives. So when they do it, it is not done lightly at all. So they could be immediately taken off duties. They could be for their own good as well as anybody else, because they will be thinking about what they did. They could be subject of an investigation, even though they have to make that instant decision. You know, the way things work today is they're probably under initial scrutiny for potentially murder, manslaughter. You know, so because
it has to consider that, doesn't it?
Absolutely, because you really have to work through the scenario you've just been through. And I know Thames Valley, when I was an assistant chief there, we had an officer who actually was the first officer ever to pull a trigger in Thames Valley, shot somebody, quite rightly, it turns out, in terms of him running towards him, and he didn't know what he had and what he was doing, and he did try to stop him, but ultimately had to pull the trigger, and it almost ruined that officer. You know, it was something that haunted him. So it really is such a difficult scenario ever to be in. And it's the same with Cressida Dick when she was with Jimenez in terms of what do you do and how do you do it? And it's making those instant decisions. And because it was counterterrorism, we in the counterterrorism committee, Allied Matters Committee, we knew that it wasn't if, but it was when somebody was going to use a suicide bomb. So we were all very aware of that, and the evidence to that effect. So from what happened on previous days, and bearing in mind the heightened tensions, and all she was getting, she would be in a darkened room like this, she would be being fed the information that was coming from the officers on the ground. And the decision was that we would give them permission, or that the senior ACPO officers would give them permission to make that decision. Ultimately, it is the person who pulls the trigger. But in this case,
still stops.
It still stops. So, you know, and you hope you make the right decision. And clearly, because you're trying to tie all the ends up together in what is a split second, sometimes you won't. And it's 20/20 vision in hindsight. If we all had that when we made the decision, we'd never make the decision we made.
No, that's a good point.
Yeah. And so, you know, so you're also weighing up with, if he's going to go onto a train, he's going to pull it. If he has a bomb and he does this, we're going to lose 100 and however many lives. You're weighing that up with what happens,
always
with
a
him.
greater good thing.
Yeah, so it's you don't know what you don't know. It's that sort of...
And so even though people say never assume because it makes an ass of you and me, you have got to make assumptions.
You have to, yeah. And even if you didn't make an assumption, if your assumption was not to have any assumptions, if the worst happens, you're criticised for that.
So yeah.
So
many positions of responsibility. So you've had armed response and terrorist responsibilities. You've been senior police officer for the whole of Cambridgeshire. You've looked after VIPs and royals, and then the royal role has taken another direction. So that for 5.5, 6 years. You were the Queen's representative in the county. Now you're the King's representative in the county. How do you as a person deal with that level of responsibility? Is it stressful? You always seem to be smiling and laughing and enjoying it, but how do you cope with or manage not being leveled by some of that pressure sometimes?
It can be stressful, and that's why I think the life of a Chief Constable nowadays is probably 5, 6, maybe a couple more years, because it is a 24/7 responsibility, and you have a vicarious responsibility for your whole constabulary. It doesn't really matter where you are in the county. I was often worrying that what's happening in Peterborough tonight or what's happening in Wisbech, but you can only do what you can do, and you have to support your officers and give them the best training and development that you possibly can, and be happy that they are going, that they, as independent individuals, they will make the right decision. And that's all you can do. And I think you have to be a big team to work like that. And you have to have confidence in each other. And that's what I really wanted to try to create in Cambridgeshire. And the other thing that I really had a passion for was the people of Cambridgeshire. I wanted every day to go in to do the best that we could for Cambridgeshire. And because I took over a failing force, I didn't want, because I knew the officers were trying to do their best. Yeah. So it was around making the framework such that they could really deliver their best, that it was noticeable by people of Cambridgeshire, and that they knew that they were getting the best service and they weren't being undersold compared to what was then seen to be the best force, Lancashire. So we would frequently actually send officers up to Lancashire to look and see what they were doing that was different to us. And there wasn't anything. It's just that we were still caught in the bad media headlines of where we were before. So that's why I'd frequently have conversations, I'd do podcasts.
And therefore is part of your dealing with all the different responsibilities it sounds like you're saying as well, you can take comfort and de-stress somewhat, knowing that you've got, your intent is to make the force better, the county improve the reputation that the police had when you joined. And so if you've always got good intent and you're putting action behind that intent, you can kind of sleep more soundly at night.
Yeah, it's that, I suppose it's altruism in some ways, that I do try to do the best I can for anybody, and it's about being proactive. I get really cross when people are inactive and don't do something. I'd rather be positively do something. You're much less likely to be criticised for anything, and this isn't about criticism, but it's for actively doing something than actively not doing something.
Because some people do sort of work on a career or a business thinking the safest thing is to do nothing.
Exactly. And I have to say that's the least safe option.
Yeah.
If I was ever looking at people and they were saying, I couldn't do that because of my career, I'd say, of course you can. Actually the people I look at are the people who take risks, but do a measured risk. It's not about being gung-ho. It's about looking at it, understanding the issue, taking a risk, trying. If it doesn't work, come back, try again. That was really what we were always doing. We were looking, regrouping, learning, and then starting off again. But I do a lot of, my husband is a stress release, bless him, and doing things outside work. And actually, travel now is a pleasure. I used to travel even when I was Chief Constable on holiday, but always be worried about what was happening. And the similar with being the Lord Lieutenant is I have a team of Deputy Lieutenants. I have a team of people I can have a conversation with. I have a great office. And, I have 2 people who really work to me in that office, and we will frequently talk things through. So a lot of it is, if you've got something that's an issue, is about talking it through.
Yeah.
And then some of it is relying on, if you have come up your career level and you've put the building blocks in place, then, you can do it. You absolutely can. And I remember when I was asked if I would be the acting Chief Constable, and it was something that came out of the blue because of the behaviours of the previous Chief Constable, I thought, I'm not going to say no, because I've done everything throughout the last, 20 odd years to actually get myself to this point. Grasp it with both hands and go for it.
And knowing you've got those building blocks. I mean, I like that sort of metaphor analogy, because often when I was running large teams, people would want the next move, and they would see a sideways move as a negative. And I used to love drawing the picture of a pyramid, where you're sort of saying, a structure that's built like a pyramid, where you've got the different skill sets at this level and some different skill sets or roles at that level, is far more solid than a single tower that one brick's removed and it all falls down, sort of thing. And so I think those building blocks and helping people understand that just a singular rise through the ranks, or a business that grows without recession or without challenge or without any failure, doesn't necessarily have the breadth of foundation and building blocks to secure it for the longer term.
Exactly. And we would do this in the organisation, because we'd have a vacancy come at a chief superintendent, and somebody said, X will get that, because it's, particularly if it's detectives, for example, because detectives are expected to go up and up and up all in the same level. And I would say, no, don't think that. I said, I have a range of superintendents, and there are some of those that I actually want to develop by taking out of ops and putting into investigation, or I want to take them out of ops and put them into complaints and discipline, or something to give them a breadth of experience. Because what became clearer towards the end of my sort of time in policing, I'm pleased to say, was that the chief officers and the officer levels below them were much more rounded individuals. It was around having experience in different things, not just being,
I think that's crucial, but sometimes people are so, I don't know that it's even that they're ambitious, but they're led to believe that to be successful, you should have this sort of straight line through. And I think that foundation is really key. I mean, if I can get to some sort of more slightly disparate questions, just because I wanted to get them in before we finish. But we talked about sort of male, female. Do you think there's much prejudice? It still exists today? Is it better? How would we compare with the world or the developed world, let's say, in terms of male, female prejudice or racial prejudice?
I have to say, because I travel a lot and I love traveling, I look back at the UK and I'm very proud of it in terms of actually, we are welcoming of all nations, even though you see on the press and media headlines about different things and it not working and something actually going awry. If you look at it in a global sense, we are a really inclusive country. You can see why people want to come here. Yeah. And the same with gender. We're perhaps not, we're probably not on both fronts actually where we want to be. But if you compare us to others, and it was interesting when I was doing women in policing, everybody would look to the States. The States have an appalling record of women actually in policing. I don't think they've moved on much from where we were when we started. When we were that 17% when we started the gender agenda, they were 11-12%.
And that's probably true of race as well.
Yeah, still. And you look to what they're actually doing and how they're doing it.
No, and I completely... I didn't know what your response would be, but I completely concur with you. And when I was building business and working with clients all around the world, it amazed me how many cultures would be really racist towards Western, see us as stupid, or for instance, in India, they still sometimes call us red monkeys. Now, you can kind of get it because we go out in the sun, get bright red, and the next day we're burnt. So, but it's very offensive, and they do believe that we're naive and stupid and so on. So I don't think prejudice is good anywhere. And as you say, there's always a better place to be and improvements that are needed. But I do look back and think we've got this great country. And part of that is, I was hearing just a few days ago, we still got net migration of 600,000. And without getting into all of that, what it says to me is we're still a country people want to come to. If we're that bad, the world wouldn't still see it as a place where you can come. And in fact, just last week, we, and it's going out tomorrow morning, the podcast was with Apprentice winner Mark Wright, who came over from Australia and did The Apprentice BBC Apprentice while he was travelling, in effect. And he called it the real land of the UK, the real land of opportunity.
Yeah.
Because he said, you can come, I had £10,000 at the beginning of the year, I had a couple of £1,000 when I went in for The Apprentice kind of thing. And I can build a multi-million-pound business coming from a completely different country. That still exists as an opportunity today. Is it going to be without challenges? No, but you had challenges in your career. Exactly. I had challenges in my upbringing. Those challenges, and it's cliche to say you don't become iron till you've been through, iron doesn't become steel till it's been through the fire. But it is so true. And we don't want people to get burnt, or we don't want it to be really hard. But sometimes that's just the necessary journey to get to where the better place exists, I think. And where next for you? What ambitions have you got going forward? I know you're very involved in charity, community. Obviously, you've got 10 years left of the Lord Lieutenancy.
Seven left of the Lord Lieutenant. In essence, my vision for that is that we get it better known and understood around the county, because we are the King's representative, and we do try to emulate things that they want to have happen, because they want to create a vibrant British society. So we want to support creating a vibrant Cambridgeshire society. And a lot of it is around saying thank you to people who go the extra mile. I mean, we have a lot of people in this county who volunteer, who just think they're doing normal stuff that everybody else is doing, and they don't realise how special they are. And I want to encourage more of those to put forward for the King's Award for Voluntary Service. Likewise, we have amazing small companies which ought to be thinking they're good enough for the King's Award for Enterprise. So I really want to see us, and we do cut above our weight in terms of the King's Award for Enterprise, but we don't in Peterborough and the north of the county. So the south get it, but the north probably think, oh, we're not as good as Cambridge, so we couldn't possibly. And there are so many companies who really would just knock the socks off the panel if they actually saw what they do.
Well,
and
you know, 5 generations of my family are from Peterborough. I call myself a self-confessed ambassador. The Chamber of Commerce I do, and some of the charity stuff I do. But it is changing, and it has changed in the last 5 years. But we were always even talked about as the poor cousin of Cambridge, Peterborough. But I'm pleased to know that's a focus of yours, and I'm feeling it as well with politics generally, that Peterborough is starting to get some of that recognition, which is good. Is there anything I haven't asked you about that you would love to talk about and wished you were asked more about when you're interviewing?
I think it's one of those things, when you've got a life, you could pick on any little bit, and I've got a vignette that actually could come out. So unless you want to be here for another 2 hours, no. Well,
in that case, maybe let's arrange another in 6 months or something. We do another one, a part 2. But I really appreciate your time. It's been, I could have talked for hours, but hopefully you've enjoyed too. If you have, like, subscribe, share. We will put details. It will be on all podcast platforms. We look forward to seeing you again on another episode of Success is a System. Thank you.